Commodification now expands to include all of life. And not only has it grown extensively, but intensively too. That is, thanks to technological innovations, the market now also contracts to address each consumer as if one at a time, individually, to facilitate more and more individual point-and-click moments of consumption. As a result, consumption is no longer stoked by what Jean Baudrillard once called a passion for the code. Rather, we desire, or we are told to desire, a code of our very own. Current demand is for programming, for the opportunity to personally chain together seemingly individualized experience, which nevertheless stays in incessant contact with, endlessly drawing from, and feeding back into all the other codes and chains being maintained out there by all the other individual programmers. What this does in the end is help fragment and disarticulate market exchange itself, allowing for quicker movement and turnover, more disparateness and sudden juxtaposition, quicker and broader and more intricate cross-referencing and communication between sectors and brands and services and objects. An onslaught of communication that strives to overcome boundaries and level hierarchies, resulting in what Jonathan Seabrook has famously called no-ground culture, which is to say that today the market itself increasingly takes on the form of a network. Okay, to wrap this up, all of this would get at one of the biggest disappointments of shows like Unmonumental, that the updated version of bricolage it advances comes across looking so distant from the politics which originally informed the notion of bricolage. During the 1970s, when Stuart Hall and John Clark and Dick Heffage and the other cultural theorists of the Birmingham School in England transferred that concept from Levi-Straussian structural anthropology into the context of contemporary capitalism, they openly admitted that bricolage was an activity confined to the realms of consumption, leisure, and fashion. But they still saw a politics and how the bricoleurs' activities entailed the smuggling of commodities across class lines. What that depended upon, though, was a model of culture that was hierarchical, in which power was openly marked and exerted by those who controlled the larger system of or language set of production, of the media, and of retail. But today, in the networked marketplace, with the ideology of user-generated content, with the ascendance of parole over law or practice over system, it becomes paradoxically harder to find a viable political strategy, perhaps because it's harder to find any collective identities. Rather than politics, there is the status of the network, which is accrued by nimbly shifting from the subcultural to the highbrow to the mainstream and back again, and so forth. Today, the art world overly romanticizes, I think, the idea of the everyday, as if in the everyday we now see the oppositionality that previously would have been located in politics or in the labor movement, say, in the State House or in union meetings. We congratulate ourselves on the victory of bringing art into the everyday, as if we weren't in fact being directed there, instead being lured by a previous colonization and instrumentalization of everyday life by capitalism. As with the pitting of practice against theory or system, so too the everyday can no longer be placed in opposition to the world of the commodity spectacle, because these formerly opposed realms have again been largely disarticulated and de-differentiated. Again, I would want to point to the fact that at present it's network structures that dominate. Indeed, networked forms of coordination were appropriated as mainstream business policy in the mid-1980s, as neo-entrepreneurialism began to take shape and corporations downsized en masse by eliminating middle management positions and outsourcing tasks to external spot labor markets, all the while continuing apace with their mega mergers and acquisitions. In terms of the workforce, the entrepreneur, free agent, and consultant now eclipsed the company man as a labor ideal, while in terms of leisure, the mass consumer gave way to the mass customizer. I'm showing you an ad or a program that is included in a lot of Sony BMG. I mean, if you could think of a more Darth Vader or Death Star-like cultural company than Sony BMG, please tell me. But they now include in a lot of their releases, including the box set release for Billy Joel's music, this program called You Mix It, which allows the purchaser to remix all the songs, or you can completely take out Billy Joel. And on the other side is an ad for Urban Outfitters. Urban Outfitters, which of course is owned by this guy in Philadelphia who was a big supporter of Rick Santorum, the most kind of rapidly anti-abortion senator who just recently got voted out of the Senate. Today's resourceful DIY artists, this is going to be a little bit harsh, but I'll do it anyways. Today's resourceful DIY artists who nurture myriad forms of convivial and surprising juxtaposition and exchange can even be seen perhaps to complement the euphemisms of entrepreneurial initiative and individual responsibility used to sell the recent neoliberal agenda of deregulation, of rolling back state assistance programs, and of ending welfare as we know it. Today's triumphant DIY artist, promoting the values of fluidity and mobility, flexibility and flux, today conveniently looks past the fact that her or his expanded agency has been purchased largely through the partial collapsing of larger social structures. In the face of all this, it would be good to remember all the inequalities that still very much exist despite all the supposed leveling. The inequalities that indeed structure the field underlying the seeming formal equality of networks. The claim that network structures are inherently democratic has in fact been problematized by recent work in sociology and urban studies. For instance, sociologist Mark Relyea finds a fierce hierarchy existing between weakly and strongly tied networks. Weakly tied networks, according to Relyea, are enjoyed by professionals who actually need social commitment to better access and exchange far-flung information. So that is, casual acquaintances end up being more beneficial than close friends and even family members when it comes to acquiring useful information. Whether it's about job openings or investment tips, potential professional contacts, project ideas, new restaurants, great hotel to stay at, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, strongly tied networks are utilized by more underprivileged communities that rely on direct mutual aid and tighter material obligations to survive, right? Somebody who you can count on to take care of the kids when you need a work-late chip, or who will give you a few dollars to tide you over until payday. This weak, strong distinction further maps onto the division made by Saskia Sassen between global actors whose travels follow the flow of products, information, and value between global cities, and lower-level labor whose search for info economy employment might necessitate migration, but whose job itself, once secured, means staying put. Recently, the weak tide theory has been taken up by Richard Florida in his influential arguments about what he calls the new creative class, by which he means young professionals who, quote, share a common ethos that values creativity, individuality, difference, and merit, who work in a wide variety of industries, from technology to entertainment, journalism to finance, high-end manufacturing to the arts, and whose function is to create meaningful new forms. End quote. According to Florida, these new young artist types show a, quote, a preference for weak ties and quasi-anonymity, and thus gravitate to dense urban neighborhoods with high residential turnover, shying away from stable communities characterized by strong ties and commitments. Members of the creative class are leery of the invasiveness of close, cohesive communities, seeking instead the flexibility and freedom to pursue and shape their lives independently, and thus express their creativity and individuality. Quote, what they look for in communities are abundant, high-quality experiences, and openness to diversity of all kinds, and above all else, the opportunity to validate their identities as creative people.